Pastor's Online Bible Study. I'm Paul Thompson, pastor of Lakeview Southern Baptist Church here in Skytook, Oklahoma. And tonight I am trying out some, well, I say new equipment. It's not new equipment, but I'm kind of repurposing some other equipment that is an upgrade from what we've been using, hoping that there's a better video and audio signal. And so, Barry, if you're watching, let me know. And Tyler, our youth pastor, is supposed to be watching. Let me know. Make sure that I have audio going out right now. So I hope that I do. You can see my microphone right here. So hopefully that is working all right. They will let me know if it isn't. So again, welcome tonight. Tonight we're going to continue on and study our study of the 10 Commandments or the 10 Words, and we'll look at that in just a moment. Last week was Thanksgiving. And so we took a break. Didn't have any evening church services Wednesday night, and I didn't do the online, but I trust that you and your family had a wonderful Thanksgiving. And just in case you were wondering, yes, turkey is for Thanksgiving, ham is for Christmas. There are some people seem to be confused on that very important and significant matter, including some of my family members. Though we did have some ham, we mostly had turkey because Thanksgiving is about turkey. Now, I think I just got a text, so let's see if somebody's telling me. Audio is solid, video is choppy. Well, that is not good. I may have to adjust some things and figure that out. So at least hopefully you can hear me. Again, this is actually a better camera, but it may be, I may have to tweak some settings on it. Anyway, turkey for Thanksgiving. I hope you understand the truth. So just kidding. So, a couple of things. We are in the Advent season. We just finished our first Sunday of Advent services this past Sunday morning. Had a wonderful, we call it Lakeview Family Christmas. And it's kind of our version of Hanging of the Green, where we decorate the sanctuary and talk about the season. We emphasized hope. Pastor Tyler brought a great message on hope. This coming Sunday is the second Sunday of Advent. I'll be preaching on the topic of peace. Advent peace. It's also the first Sunday of the month, so we will have Lord's Supper. And so we would invite you, if you're in the Skytook area, to come join us. A reminder that this Sunday we begin our new old schedule. We go back to the way it was pre-pandemic, and that is we have one worship service, and it's at 10:30. And in Sunday school, our Sunday school classes, our Bible study classes for all ages, will begin at 9:15. This is our schedule before the pandemic. After we took a break, we had two services and no Sunday school. And then we've been back to one service for a while, but we'd flipped them, service at 9:15 and Sunday school after that. And so officially this coming Sunday, we are going back to basically what it says on the sign outside. And that is Bible study at 9:15, worship at 10:30. So I hope that you will come and be part of that. We're also starting a new adult Sunday school class, which is, again, kind of an old Sunday school class that hasn't met since the pandemic. And that is, we have like 4, I think, adult classes you can choose from: a men's class, women's class, and now 3 mixed adult classes. This one is taught by one of our deacons named Matt Pryor, and he'll begin teaching this coming Sunday. So maybe you used to be in Matt's class, and then maybe it's time to come back. Or maybe you're interested in looking for a class that's just now starting. We'd love to have you come be part of that, along with our other ministry activities. So, all right, that's enough announcements. If you have prayer requests, you can share those. If I do not see them for tonight, I will share them in person. Our evening Bible study tonight starts at 6:30. So, and again, I apologize if the video apparently is choppy. Not sure why that is. We'll see what we can do to do some test runs. Should have done that before tonight. But this is a better camera, and we just may need to tweak some of the settings in the streaming. So, all right. When I use the phrase, like we really had bad service, what comes to mind? For example, you probably think about a restaurant service. So, for example, last night, Karen and I were eating at a restaurant. I will not mention its name. It was in Tulsa, though it's a chain, and they're in several places, though not in Skytook. And so we went in, and we know what we like when we go there. They have a great salad, just the salad that I love. And then my wife really likes the burgers, and I've got great fries, and she also wanted a shake. That may tell you where we were. Anyway, maybe not. So we go in, and I always get it's just a great salad, and I stepped up, told her what I wanted, and now the lady was very friendly. I'll give her that. The lady behind the counter was very friendly, and I appreciated that. But she said, "Well, we're out of that." So we stepped back, looked a little longer. So we got the regular salad, but I got the dressing that would have gone with the others anyway. So we ordered it and ordered the burger, fries, and all of that. Then they gave us our drinks, and we went while we were waiting. We went to find a place to sit, and we walked up to the first table, and it was dirty. And we walked up to the next table, and it was dirty, and the next table, and we went all the way around the circle in different areas, and every table we came to either had food or trash left on the tabletop or the seat, and maybe some lettuce or something on the seat. And so finally we settled on one that had the least amount of stuff on it, and then just kind of wiped it on. And so you're feeling, and then, so while we're waiting on our dinner, which is going to include fries, I go over to their ketchup dispensers. They have two of them, and I start pushing on one of them, and it's out. And I go to the other one, and you can already see it's out because it's lifted up and there's nothing in it. And so I thought, no ketchup. So I go over to the front counter where there's 3 or 4 people working, and they all seem to be happy and not overly crowded. There's only 2 other couples in the place. And I just mentioned to them that, hey, you're out of ketchup. Both dispensers are out. And so he kind of just smiled, nodded. And long story short, we got our meal, and the meal was fine. But by the time we left, no one had ever come out and cleaned any of the tables, and no one had ever put any more ketchup in the dispensers. That's an example of bad service. You have a story, don't you, of bad restaurant service? Maybe you had to wait, an hour. Maybe it took a long time. You just get on, on TripAdvisor or Yelp or some of that, and you'll read lots of examples of places that have had bad service. Maybe you've had bad service at a hotel. Karen and I had a terrible experience multiple times, but one time in particular, it's just stuff was left in the bathroom, in the toilet. I could go on. It was just, the whole thing was a fiasco. And it's the first time I'd ever left a hotel, and but you got to be careful. I did read last week about a lady who had a bad experience in her hotel, and just multiple things that went wrong and were not taken care of. And so that evening at her hotel, she got onto either TripAdvisor or Yelp or something, and she put in a bad review. And within an hour, she had a knock on the door, and the police were there escorting her out of the hotel because the owners had called and said, she gave us a bad review. We want her out of here. And they let her, and the police enforced that. So be careful. But bad service. So we think about that, whether it's a hotel, whether it's a restaurant. We think about bad service on a flight, in an airport perhaps, and just different areas we think about, and we've all had, and we understand bad service. What about good service? Think about the times that you've had what you would consider good service. When the waiter goes above and beyond. Or I can remember a flight that I had on Southwest, and of course, sometimes you get the one that does the wrapping and does the fun. They just make it fun, and they're super friendly. But I remember one that was very crowded, coming out of Sacramento, and this lady got on who was very belligerent. I mean, and she just she was not kind at all. And watching those flight attendants just treat her with the utmost respect and try to accommodate her, but in a fair way, and she was just not having any of it. And I thought, I sure appreciated the service that those Southwest flight attendants had given to her. And again, we'll think about good service in a hotel when they went above and beyond, and at a restaurant where it's just those touches and the attention to detail and the care, where they make you feel appreciate and feel like that you're important, and that they're there to meet your needs. And so we know the difference, don't we, between bad service and good service. What about worship service? Let's throw that in the mix. How do you know? How do you know when you've had a good worship service, or when we use that phrase, when we make the comment, "Hey, that worship service was good"? What do we usually mean? Let's just be honest. When we come away from, maybe you're visiting a church, or maybe it's just your regular church fellowship, and you come away from that Sunday worship service, And you said, well, that was a good service. What do we usually mean by that? And then again, being honest, we usually mean that they sang songs that we liked. For some of us that might have been they sang some of the good old hymns. For some of us that means they sang some of the really good, strong new choruses or praise songs that really stir our soul. And so often it has to do with that. Maybe it means that people were friendly to us and we really liked that. Maybe the kids didn't fall asleep, or they weren't bored, or they actually want to go back, or the pastor was funny but serious, or maybe he shouted a lot and he preached on sin and you like that, and you just but we look at all the different elements, the way they did things, and so we go away thinking, that was a good service. Basically, I enjoyed it. Matter of fact, I've seen churches advertise before about how you will enjoy our worship service, and talk about that and the different things that they do to make sure that they accommodate you and your every needs, and including some churches that have it down to a science, mathematical science about what time they start and when they do this and why they do that. And I have a friend, I know his church has it so arranged so that every moment is filled with something. And so so during prayer time, you're supposed to pray a little the pastor's supposed to pray a little longer so that the worship team can get off the stage without causing a problem or anything like that. And so then in that case, prayer was being used to facilitate that, all to just be more of a pleasing, the aesthetic. And I know that seems kind of extreme, though it's a real example, and I think it happens a lot. But just think about, how do we determine as a worship service? And I doubt we would often say, well, that was a bad worship service, but a bad service. But we can say maybe it wasn't as good. Maybe it was a little boring. We didn't like the songs. No one was friendly to us. No one shook our hands. The pastor didn't come say hi. Didn't like what the musicians were wearing, or something like. We come up with all sorts of things that we can think of. The sermon didn't speak to me. I didn't learn anything. We can think of all those different things, and so we usually know what we mean when we talk about and we think about whether or not a worship service was good. Well, the first examples I was talking about, restaurants and hotels, those really have to do with what's called customer service, don't they? Customer service. What's the difference between customer service and worship service? Now I'm going to come back to that, but I want to pause right now and let's kind of recap where we are. We're in the middle of studying what we often call the 10 Commandments, what the Bible calls the 10 words, found in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. And we're looking at the first two words. Some traditions consider it one commandment or one word. Most of us Protestants consider it two commandments. But have no other gods, and do not make any idols, make any graven images, or bow down or worship to them. Whether it's one command or word or two, they both are connected together. They both have to do with worship. And so let me read the pertinent verses again. We're in Exodus 20. Listen to verse 2 through 6. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, that is a carved image, or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. So that's what we're looking at. And last week we introduced this. And so just for a quick recap, if I say last week, last time, it was 2 weeks ago. If you didn't hear that, you can go back and listen to that, because I'm not going to have time to elaborate. But basically, we looked at these two words, these verses, and we emphasized that, well, first of all, recognizing that we are creatures who were made for worship. We are creatures who worship. We can't help but worship. It's one of the things I think that separates us from the animals. We are worshipers. And we spent a lot of time on this kind of last week, at least especially in person. I mentioned it online, but this command, or these commands, these words imply that we have a choice about worship. That God, big G God, Yahweh, the divine name, is not the only God that we could worship. He is the God above all gods. He is the unique God. He is the creator God. But that there are many, and we looked at how the Hebrew word Elohim is used to refer to God, and but it literally means gods. That there are many Elohim, but there is only one Elohim whose name is Yahweh. So Yahweh Elohim, the Lord our God, is above all other gods. He created all of them. He is not like them in that way, in that there's none like him, and he is the only one to worship. But there are other gods that we can worship. And Israel had that choice. They were in the midst of all these other nations. They'd just come out of Egypt that had tons of gods. As a matter of fact, the plagues that brought them out of Egypt, as God used to deliver them, were basically direct battle against the gods of Egypt. So it's kind of like God versus the gods of Egypt. And so coming out of that, and Yahweh Elohim, Yahweh God, knew that going into Canaan, into the promised land, that they would be surrounded by other nations with many other gods and idols, and they would constantly be tempted to bow down and worship other gods. And so he begins his 10 words with them by saying, "You shall not have any other Elohim before me or in my presence. I am the only one. And therefore, also don't make images of them to bow down. Don't make idols like the nations all around you to bow down and serve them." So this is a command. These are commands about worship, and that we do have options. God, we can worship God, or we can worship other gods. We can worship idols. We have a choice. Israel had a choice to make. In the New Testament churches and the believers had a choice to make. You and I today, even though we live in a little bit, a very much different culture and situation, we still have the same choice to make about which God or gods we will indeed worship. So, not only were we created to worship, we were made to specifically worship the one God named Yahweh, because we were made in his image and in his likeness. Now, in this text that we read, there are 2 words for worship. There are 3 key. There's more than 3. There's 4 or 5, but there are 3 key words for worship in the Old Testament. 2 of them show up in this passage, specifically looking at verse 5, where the Lord says, "You shall not worship them or serve them." Who? The other gods that you might have, especially that we make these idols of to represent. And so he says, "You shall not worship." And that word worship there is the Hebrew word shakah. The Greek word for that is proskuneo. For those of you that like the words, those don't necessarily mean anything to us, but they both mean the same thing in both Hebrew and Greek, which literally means to bow down, which is why the text says, "You shall not," some say, "You shall not bow down. You shall not worship." It is to prostrate yourself before, to bow down in homage. It is to humble yourself before someone greater, and to bow down before, paying homage in humility before, again, someone or something. And so that's that word. And then he says, "You shall not bow down or prostrate yourself before these other gods or serve them." And that is the Hebrew word abad, or the Greek word latruo. And we've heard the word latruo and liturgeo in the New Testament, where we get the word liturgy from. But the word latruo means to work for, to serve, or to labor. And in the context of worship, it's to do what God requires, what is necessary to worship him, or whatever the God requires. It is, and so in the context of worship, it would be offering sacrifice. And sacrifice is the other key word for worship. It's not used here, but to sacrifice. And so whatever the God requires, that is what you would do. And so Yahweh God had some requirements in worship, and we see that all throughout Exodus and Leviticus, especially about the things that they would do when they came to worship him. And when we do those things, we are serving God. And so worship is service. It is both bowing down and it is working for or serving. And so that's where we get the common phrase worship service. What time does your worship service start? We might say ours starting this Sunday is at 10:30. But then yet technically our worship service or service of worship, to borrow Paul's phrase in Romans 12:1 and 2, is begins when we wake up. It's every day. We are to serve God and worship every day. But when we talk about corporate worship in what we think of a worship service, we talk about what time it starts. We talk about, we use the word worship service in that way, and we get it from this concept, especially from the Ten Commandments. And so we need to understand that this is a biblically accurate term to call it the worship service. But is our modern idea the same? And the way we use that and think about it today, is it the same as what God meant in Exodus and what the Old Testament, New Testament writers meant when they talk about worship and service? To worship it always involves bowing down in humility and working for someone or something, doing what is required to serve the God or the gods. And so two key questions then come that we've got to ask ourselves based on these two commandments. To whom or what are we bowing down? Remember I said that we are worshiping creatures. We were made to worship. We can't, even atheists worship. They may not call it that. They may not recognize it as such, but every human being worships. We are worshiping creatures. It is put in us, in our very nature. We were made for worship and made to worship. So we all worship. So the question is, who are we worshiping? It's kind of like the old Bob Dylan song. You got to serve somebody. And he makes it clear. It'll be the devil or the Lord. And that'll sum up my talk tonight. I mean, it's going to be one or the other. It's either God or the gods. It's either Yahweh God or an idol representing one of the false gods and the gods of the powers of darkness. And so, but we are going to serve or worship someone. So to whom or to what are we bowing down, and who is to be served, and who is to do the serving? If worship is service, and it is, then the key question to answer is who is doing the serving and who is receiving the service. And that's where I want to compare it back to our opening discussion about customer service. I talked about good service and bad service. We recognize that's customer service. And what does that have to do with worship service? Well, in most ways, it doesn't have anything to do with it. But unfortunately, I think we brought that over into our common experience, especially in America. I can't speak for anywhere else, but we brought that over into our common experience. We brought our customer service experience into our worship service experience. And so when I go to a restaurant, I am being served and I expect them to meet my needs and my preferences. The customer is always right. When I go to a hotel, the airline, whatever it might be, whatever, Amazon, whatever store it might be at, customer service, I expect them to meet my needs and to do whatever. Matter of fact, if you look up a definition of customer service, it has to do with meeting the needs and making sure the experience is a good one, for the customer. I am the customer and I am to be served. We bring that over into a church service, into church life, into our worship service. And when we say it and identify it out loud, we know, oh, there's something wrong with that, but yet we do it. And so I come into a box-looking building, usually rectangular, maybe square-shaped, that has what? That has seats all lined out facing towards the front. And so there might be, the multitude of seats are all sitting there and they're all facing front. And I see some instruments and I see some microphones and I see some things up on a stage, elevated up, where everyone's sitting that I'm coming in to sit. I'm watching up there. So automatically I know what I'm at. I am at a concert and I'm expecting a good show. I'm expecting, we sometimes call these auditoriums, places we hear. And so if we're not careful, just by the very nature of how we have things set up, we walk into this building, we call a sanctuary sometimes, and we are expecting to be served. We're expecting for them to sing the songs we want to sing and to make us feel good. We expect to laugh, to cry, to be challenged, to be inspired, to have our minds and brains stimulated. We expect to enjoy. As I mentioned, many of those churches advertise, you come enjoy our worship service. And so we bring this customer service mentality, and therefore we judge whether or not it was a good worship service or a not so good worship service based on how well we were served. We treat it just like we treat the restaurant or the hotel or the store. But that's not what God's talking about. That's not his idea of worship service in Exodus 20 or anywhere in the Old or the New Testament. It is a worship service. And if we're going to use the customer service concept, then in that sense, and I don't like this, so I won't use it again, but the customer's not us, it's God. Let's put it a different way. Who is the object of our worship? Well, we would say God, but when we go into the restaurant and into the hotel, who is the object? Who is being served? We are. And we bring that over into church and we expect to be served. But in worship, we are not being served. God is being served. And so God says, you will worship, that is, bow down, and you will serve. He says negatively, don't worship or bow down and don't work for the idol or the God that's represented behind it. The positive aspect of that is, what are we called to do? We're called not to do that kind of worship and service. What are we called to? It's throughout Exodus, throughout the Bible. We're called to bow down, and we're called to work for and serve God. Worship is always meant to be Godward. Now, we are blessed by it. We are encouraged by it. We are convicted by it. But it's not about us, is it? And that's part of these first two words, these first two commandments. Now, it's primarily talking about not worshiping other gods and idols. Uh, but if I'm coming into a worship service and I'm expecting to have my needs served, then guess who I've made God in that context? Me. And if I make myself a God, then really I'm not just serving myself, I'm serving a false God. I'm serving, um, I'm serving an idol. I've made myself an idol. And behind that self-made idol lurks the dark one, the enemy, Satan, the devil, the principalities and powers that are pleased whenever I come to a worship service to get my own needs met and to serve myself. There's a lot of implications of that. I don't have time to deal with that tonight and to go into all of that. But matter of fact, I'm probably going to have to stop right here. If you're in town, come on up in 30 minutes. We start at 6:30 because we're going to cover more about God saying he is a jealous God and about idol worship and what today might be idols. How does that apply in today's culture? Do we still have idols and other gods that we worship? We'll talk some more about that. But I wanted to leave you this whole customer service versus worship service idea. I came across a quote, and I did not write down who said it, but it was a good quote. There's that phrase sometimes, what did you get out of the worship service? He addresses that. He says, what should we get out of the worship? Wrong question. Worship is not a utility, but an offering. That is a sacrifice, an economy of grace that interrupts and critiques the feverish cycles of production and consumption. If you want relevance, excitement, or profit, go to a rally, a concert, or the stock exchange. To put it most counterculturally, blessed are the bored, for they shall see God. And I'm not promoting boring worship services. But if I'm not coming for me, and if I recognize that worship is always a bowing down and always a serving and working for God, not for me, and that any benefit I gain, and I will, is not the goal. The goal is this a good worship service? Was God served? Was he honored and glorified? Was he sung about in ways that were truthful and powerful? Jesus say we worship in spirit and in truth. And so have we done that? It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about God. I've heard it put, God, it's an audience of one. And we set it up like we're the audience and all the players up on stage with the instruments are the performers, but that's not true. I like it the way one person said that in worship, God's the audience and we are the worshipers, and the people up front, like me and the worship pastor and those, we are lead worshipers. We are prompters. We are worshiping together. Uh, and I'm not saying we necessarily have to change our architecture or our setup inside, though that would be worth considering, um, because our architecture and our setup communicates what we believe about worship. And we have to already work against the fact that if I walk into any other building with that kind of setup, I think I'm at a concert or a lecture or a movie, but I'm there to be entertained. I'm there to have my needs met. It is not conducive to recognizing that I'm not the audience. I am the performer. I am the one doing the work of worship. I am the one coming to bow down, not bowing down to my preferences, not bowing down to my needs, bowing down to God. And God has no needs, but He has requirements. He has expectations that are actually there so that we are blessed. But it's not about us. We are blessed when He is blessed, when He is most glorified. And so here's our first word. Now, I wanted to talk more, and I will talk in person more about God being a jealous God and about the idols in our lives today and what we are to do. Let me just summarize it this way. The New Testament talks about idolatry as well. As a matter of fact, I love the way John ends his first letter. Dear children, guard yourselves from idols. And again, back then they had idols and they had temples and things that we don't have in the same way. But I would say that if there's anything in our life, anything in my life that I am bowing down to and serving and worshiping, working for, that takes the place of God, that takes me away from living for God and following Him, then that has become an idol. Anything that pulls me away from that, it smells like an idol. So what are we to do? We're to daily make a conscious, intentional decision to bow down before and to live and work for God alone, Exodus 20, and to guard our hearts against idolatry. Because anytime we find ourselves, our hearts being pulled away from listening to, following, and serving God and making Him the goal of our choices and our thoughts in our lives, then be careful. Lurking behind that, as is lurking behind every idol, is the devil, is the enemy, is the fallen Elohim of the unseen realm, the principalities and powers and their leader, who we call the Satan or the devil, the prince of darkness, and the dark powers are at work. And they love it when we take our eyes off Jesus. They love it when we come to a worship service to serve ourselves, because then pride kicks in and our own desires instead of humbly bowing before God. In the early church tradition, kept by the Eastern Orthodox, still do it today, they commonly say this phrase every time they worship, both at church and in their own private worship. I bow down before God. And they bow down before Him. We bow down before You, O Lord. We bow down before Christ, our God. We bow down before Christ Himself, our God and our King. It's a reminder, both verbally and physically, that worship is bowing down. And we're not bowing down to ourselves. We're bowing down to Him. So I hope you have good customer service next time you're out. But I hope this coming Sunday that you gather with God's people for a worship service. And I hope you indeed do have a good service, that God is served well, that He is glorified, that He is pointed to, that sins are confessed and praise is offered up and mercy is distributed and given and the good news is proclaimed and lives are changed. When we live and worship Godwardly and not towards ourselves, we will find ourselves filled with His presence, filled with His Spirit, to live a life that, as Paul says in Romans 12, is a spiritual service of worship. Thanks for joining me tonight. Next week, we'll move on. I think we'll get to the next commandment. And so the next words. I hope you'll join us. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this evening. Thank you for this challenging word you've given us, Lord, in these 10 words. We thank you that you have made us worshiping creatures. Help us open our eyes and our hearts to recognize the idols in our life. And Lord, may we each day make the conscious, intentional choice to bow down before you, to serve only you. May you show us in this struggle of life that we are indeed in a battle against competing gods. And may we recognize the work of principalities and powers lurking behind the scenes in our life. And may we intentionally bow down and serve you alone. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. God bless you. Thanks for joining me tonight.